Just on the banking environment side, I think generally speaking, the Czech banking sector has largely been much better underpinned, I would say, from a capital structure standpoint, from a liquidity standpoint, from a currency mismatch standpoint, compared to some of the other countries in the region. So it's generally withstood this downturn much better than let's say some of the other countries that I won't name, but in the Central European space, which have more of currency issues, which have much more of liquidity issues, and they've got support coming in from the parent companies, because in essence, the banking sector is largely foreign-owned. Having said that, what I see going into 2011 is banks, while they're prudent, are actively looking to lend. So that includes us as well. We're no different from any of the other banks acting in the Czech Republic, but we are very much looking to lend, as are the other banks. The liquidity
at all levels, commercial, retail.
Absolutely. At all levels.
Back in the game.
Absolutely. At all levels, commercial, retail. I think there are a few sectors which are continuing to struggle, which are primarily in the commercial real estate lending space. I think that sector is continuing to struggle, but leaving aside that particular sector, I think what I'm seeing is some banks being willing to lend. I think the bigger question is, are companies willing to expand and utilize incremental capital? I think that's the big question mark. But I think from a banking standpoint, I would tell you, from having seen what's been happening in the Czech Republic, from talking to customers, I think banks are out there willing to lend. Customers who are looking to expand will find capital for expansion. I think it's a good question. I think generally speaking, as we've seen Euro crisis, what has the Euro crisis done? The Euro crisis effectively a public crisis. It's a crisis which has its roots in government borrowing. It has its root in governments being able to control spending, or having overspent in the last 3 or 4 years, ignoring some of the Maastricht criteria, and having gone beyond what they were supposed to go. But now that they've done it, I think the big question mark over last year and this year is, we've seen some issues in Greece, we've seen issues in Ireland, and clearly now what we're seeing is potentially a spillover into some of the larger economies, which are slightly, I would say, slightly better underpinned than what you saw in the smaller economies. So I think the big question mark, and this is a test of the entire EU proposition, I think is going to be that the stronger economies, which have effectively bailed out some of the smaller economies or some of the weaker economies in the space, I think it's going to be a test. It's going to be a test because some of the governments, without naming names, will have to go through a debt restructuring exercise. And as they go through this debt restructuring exercise, there will have to be some haircuts taken. Now, whether that pain is generally taken in one go or done in, I would say, in a fairly stable yet, I would say, parceled form, is going to decide what happens in the EU space. But having said that, I do not see there being any threat to the entire EU, so to speak. But I do see the EU nations sitting down and thinking post this crisis on not just entry but also exit criteria, and figuring out the rules of the road, so to speak. I still think the euro is a very young currency. So we forget that the euro is a very, very young currency compared to what we've seen some other currencies. So there is always, I would say, teething issues associated with if you put a project like this together, and I think this is part of that process. So it's a natural process. It's a process that has been there for a century or two. So I suspect that there is not going to be any major issues associated with the euro, but I think some of the big players, some of the big countries will have to step up and support during the short term. But in the medium term, I think policy measures will have to be agreed to potentially agree and to make sure that some of these events don't happen again. I think globally we've gone through, the last 3 years we've gone through a big period of restructuring where we've kind of refocused the company, what we call the Citicorp business, which is effectively our institutional business and our consumer business. And we've made the emerging markets as the central focal point of the proposition that we have. And The Czech Republic is no different. It's very much, I wouldn't call it an emerging market, but I would call it an emerged market, a developed market, but yet we see much more growth potential in the Czech Republic than what we, let's say, see in Western Europe. So to answer your question, we are very much positioned for growth. I think we are the leading one of the leading corporate finance investment banks in the country. That's something we want to continue to be. Aspirationally, globally, that's our goal, to be one of the leading investment banks, corporate finance banks in the world. We are one of the leading banks for, as a commercial bank, we bank almost 60% of the multinationals operating in the Czech Republic today. And that's a large market share that we have of that particular segment. We want to grow that market share despite us being large. That's again a core proposition that we've got a global strategy in place for. Thirdly, commercial segment, again a high growth segment for us. While the overall market may not be growing, we're growing this business. We're expecting to grow it between 10 and 20% this year. So we have aggressive growth plans on that business. And lastly, on the consumer banking side, we've seen some incremental traction, particularly for our cards business, particularly in the second half of last year. And we want to complement that by relaunching the consumer finance business, which we have just done late last year. And we're now beginning to see some traction on that business as well. And lastly, one thing we have not focused on in the Czech Republic, where we've had a bit of an intermittent strategy, is the retail bank. And we have now hired a full team, complemented by bankers locally and international bankers, where this team is now going to go out there and build a retail bank which will not be bricks and mortar driven. We will have branches because we feel that our customers do need branches, but we will also use technology as the center point of our proposition. And that means providing technology to customers either through in this highly digitized and even rapidly even becoming more digitized age with our iPhones and our iPads and our laptops, to allow banking on the go with laptops, with computers, with phones, and that's really our strategy. So the strategy in Czech Republic is no different from what we have in some of the bigger markets that we operate in, whether it's in Asia, whether it's in Latin America, or whether it's the Middle East, or whether it's Central Europe. So it's a very similar strategy. Obviously, there are different markets, have different sizes of business. I can tell you that the Czech Republic credit cards business, for example, is one of the biggest businesses we have in this part of the world, and we want to significantly grow it even further as we look into the next 2 to 3 years.
And why is that so, the credit card business?
Well, credit cards is how every product has, I would say, a development cycle. So, customers first understand the product, they get used to the product, they adapt to the product, and then they actually assimilate the product and use the product much more actively. So it's in the US where this product is taken off. Clearly, a credit card is by far a better product to have than a debit card. It gives you free credit for 30 to 40 days, and it gives you a considerable greater financial flexibility than you would get with a debit card. But having said that, what we've seen, at least in some of the local Central European markets, the debit card market is a much larger market, as it is even in the Czech Republic today, as compared to credit cards, because not everybody is eligible for a credit card, and if you open an account, you're eligible for a debit card. So by definition, debit cards will always have a much greater heft, so to speak, from a transactional perspective. But for the right market segment, credit cards actually make a lot of sense. So it's a convenience product. It's a product that gives you a lot of financial flexibility. It's a product that allows you to actually travel at a short notice without having to take any cash with you. So by definition, in a world which is becoming, as I've mentioned, increasingly global, people are traveling much more, the use of this product has become much greater, has found much greater acceptance. So that's the way we look at this business. It's a global business for us in any case. Just like our investment banking business, just like our transaction services business, just like any corporate finance business that we run today, our cards business, we deem it to be a global business along with the retail business. So it's a focused business for us, and we're spending money to make sure that we retain our market proposition. Yeah, I think as is a challenge, I personally have responsibility for Czech, Slovakia, Romania, and Bulgaria, and having been in Central Europe now for almost 5 years, I think I've got a few experiences that I can share and utilize a little better. Having been in Czech Republic now for about 9 or 10 months, I would say the biggest challenge, we're a people's business. Contrary to whatever people will tell you, we're actually a people business. We're all about hiring talent from the market. So the challenge for us is always finding talent and retaining talent. So what I've seen in the last 12 to 24 months in Central Europe, that generally turnover rates, staff turnover rates, have generally reduced significantly because there's not as much competitive pressure in the marketplace as there was maybe 3 to 4 to 5 years ago. But having said that, finding great talent is always a challenge. And that's something that we continue to focus on and really make sure, whether we hire people laterally or we hire young people who are just coming out of school, I think that for us is key. I think the second part of it is making sure that as our customers evolve, we evolve with them. There are customers who've chosen to bank with Citibank. There's a reason for that. We appreciate that. And I think as the rate of, I would say the rate of development of customers' needs in the last 3 or 4 or 5 years is, I would say, is much faster, much greater than what we've seen in the last 15 to 20 years. Customer needs are evolving because technology is evolving. So as a bank, therefore, we pride ourselves on innovation and making sure that customers choose us because of what we deliver to the customer. Customer services, innovation. And lastly, I think the biggest challenge for us, and which is in line with our CEO's stated mission and objectives, is really the principle of responsible finance. What we want to make sure is that as we do a business in any country, as we do any business in any country, and as a bank, we have a certain role to play. I would say that making sure that whatever we're doing is for customers, makes sense for customers, is for the benefit of customers, is paramount. What sometimes we find in the marketplace is market products which are driven entirely solely for the purposes of profit or to dress up certain numbers or certain products. Excuse me. I think we want to step away from some of those products. It's something that we as a company, as part of the last 3-year restructuring, have really embraced. What we will do will only be customer focused. It will only be driven by customer needs, and hopefully will put us right at the front from a customer need and customer aspiration point.